Test, test, test. Hey guys, this is Tony Leonard sitting in for ZBrushLIVE on this Saturday afternoon. I believe it's the 22nd, September 22nd? I think so. I'm pretty sure it's the 22nd. Anyway, hope everybody's doing great and having a good weekend. Give me just one sec to make sure that I have a few settings going correctly, and we shall get started. Make sure that I have sources open to answer everybody's questions and comments. There we go. Give me a shout out in the chat there and let me know if anybody's listening. I will, of course, try to answer any questions that anybody has. But if you can hear me okay, if my audio and video is good, just let me know, and we'll get started here. Sweet. Good. Been messing around with some of my settings to make sure that everything's good in stream, so I hope today will go off without a hitch. You might hear a little something in the background, but you should hear me pretty clear. And let's get started. All right. Okay. Here, and I'll turn on this. There we go. All right, guys, all set. You guys can see my screen pretty okay, I'm sure. All right, so today I thought I would have some fun. I think I've shown well, the last couple of streams. You know, I usually jump into doing some hard surface designs, but along with doing hard surface, every once in a while I like to dabble in environments, and I thought it would be fun to kind of show a process that I've been messing around with, and that is using the Zmodeler to do sort of like environment pieces, whether they be like sort of like architectural, but I've also been doing a lot of work with displacements and rendering a lot of things in Octane. So if just sort of as an additional to ZBrush bonus for this afternoon, you might see me jump over to Octane and set some things up. Although it won't be the focus, I think what I want to do is be able to show sort of like a process of building scenes that you could render out with a lot of simplicity, but have sort of a nice, like, sort of complex and or good basis for basing a 2D illustration from. Like, say, for example, if you're doing some world building and you need to set up a prop, like scape or like a room or something like that, at least an environment. You can usually build a lot of geometry very quickly and block things out using the Zmodeler, and then you can port those things over to Octane or whatever renderer system that you use. But with Octane, I like it because it has a lot of really cool lighting systems attached to it, and the sort of the richness of the render is fully GPU, and so like, say, for example, inside of my hardware, anybody using Pascal cards of today, 1080s, 1070s, you could probably start to see like a lot of performance difference in rendering something. So, before, I think you guys have seen me do environments, especially when I did sort of the Blade Runner piece a couple of streams back. I used Keyshot primarily as my renderer for that. But today I'm going to take a little bit of a different route. So, first of all, I'm actually going to skip over. Actually, you know what? I can do it here. Let's do it here. Let's start off with just like a simple tool that I'm actually going to replace. This is just sort of used as a dummy setup I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to look at my floor. Okay, and then subtools. And actually for this I'm going to append a 2D plane and sort of start to get the 2D plane laid out so I can just use it as a floor, right? So it actually displays vertical, and of course for beginners the reason why you don't see the backside is because the facing normal is you know, here along the forward position. These blue hairlines, of course, being Z forward. I'm going to just take you can change this, of course, display properties, double, and that way I can sort of see the back depending. Actually I should have had this selected and do double here, and that way I can see the back. There we go. I'm going to hide this guy for a moment, but I'm actually going to rename this. So if I put this star here, you know, starting off with a sort of like a default piece of geometry, I'll just go ahead and rename it. There we go. There we go. And I'm going to come over here. So that guy is hidden. I'm going to get out my widget, world space widget, and I'm going to hit shift and turn, and as you can see it starts to snap to the various degrees, right? So I'm going to put it at 90 degrees, minus 90 degrees, and I think I'm going to size it up. So to edit, usually with geometry I like to when I'm working with the gizmo, I like to turn on LSIM so that everything spaces correctly, because sometimes with it off it might have a different you know, pivot for the scale or something like that. So just to make sure, I'm going to turn it on and just scale this really big. Hit F to center it on the screen. And so I'm overlapping the grid, the default grid, just a little bit. I'll place this down right there. There we go. Alright, so that should be big enough. And if I look at this, it's subdivided, but I don't think I really need to subdivide it any more than this for now. Namely because I actually wouldn't really need any geometry. I could just make this one solid square. Actually, you know what, maybe I should do that. If you're going to start from that kind of position somewhere else, like say for example, I'm going to skip over to Blender and just I'll delete this guy. Oops, delete that guy there. There we go, and then I'll just hit Shift A, get a mesh. Oops, Shift A plane, and I'll scale it out pretty big. And let's see. There we go. That should be good. And so later on, pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this plane and I'm going to UV unwrap it, right? Because there are going to be things that I'll want to put along the plane in the form of like displacement maps. So displacement maps, of course, you know, you guys can all make from geometry or something like that. For what I'm going to do today, I'm actually going to use a little app that's free that I found out about. Very cool guy put it together. It's called Displacement. It's kind of hard to pronounce, but Displacement is a free app. And it's basically like a displacement generator. So I can use a tool like this to just you know, sort of run some displacements that look kind of something like a building or a set of buildings. So when I'm using some large cityscapes or something like that, like I can sort of change, you know, iterations, brightness, you know, the scale of the squares and how far they go up. And this, you know, when you pull back from something like this, it really looks kind of cool because, you know, you're pushing out shapes from like basically a flat plane. So I will mess with that and probably just a second here. So I'm gonna close that. I just want to get like a flat plane that's like no geo, right? So just single flat plane. But for now, I think I'm just going to use this default one, right? So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the floor there, hide the polyframes, and I'm going to simply start by hitting BI and go with a primitive, an insert primitive, and I'll hit M, basically to just get like a cube. Let's see. There we go. And I'll go with a Q cube, right? And so I'll just sort of start to block out some things. So if you have any questions while I'm working on this, I'm just gonna like stop gabbing so much and probably just concentrate on doing a little bit of a block out. So maybe just thinking of an interesting layout for a scene. And of course I can duplicate these just so I can have a couple of blocks to mess with. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, yeah, sure, I could probably give you a few tips if you're a beginner at ZBrush, certainly. Okay, so I'm actually not really caring about which objects I duplicate and which are still masked together. So basically, every time I duplicate a shape, I have to clear the mask and maybe look at it by polyframes. And then what I can do is actually hit Alt. I'm going to click on the floor, right? Actually, let me clear the mask, and I'll just use something like either a gizmo or transpose. Either one of these. If you hit Y, you can toggle between the gizmo and the transpose tool for moving objects around in 3D space. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the world space tool or the world space gizmo tool. And I'm going to hit Control on the keyboard and click here, which will automatically mask the the different polygroups that you have established. So there's only 2. So I want the plane and I want to separate it from these cubes. So I'm just going to go ahead here. I have this in my UI placed, so I'm going to split masked points. And I keep this split masked points pretty handy in my UI because I use it a lot, especially if I'm doing any quick blockouts and I build pieces and they're still one subtool and I need to make them different, then I just use polygroups to select one element and then split it. So I do a lot of that. So I'm going to go here and see. I'm going to take these guys and maybe just go down to polygroups, do a quick auto group, and that way I can sort of just group out the little squares. There we go. Actually, let's turn this guy right side up. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is just do the same. Click these, do that. Click this guy, do that. Click this, alt clicking it, control click, mask that off, split points. So now I have like 4 individual elements that I can control with this guy, right? So, and then the easy part being that you can kind of take these guys, sort them out using a scale. Again, I'm using LSIM, and I can just come out here and stretch some geometry, and this will give me a lot of my general block out of the scene that I want. So I want like an end of the block building here at the end of this plane, or maybe something to take up the space. I can do the same with this guy, but I'm just going to shove them off to the space, the edges here, just to kind of get them out of the way, and I'm going to use them later, right? So they're just sort of proxy dummies. So take this guy, put him there. Scale this. Be careful to hit the handles right. There we go. And so now, the reason why I use QMesh for something like this is because QMesh cubes or Q cubes are pretty simple. They're just like a 4x4 cube, right? I could initialize them into something else if I wanted to by coming down. Where is it? Initialize. And so with initialize, with any shape, you have like a Q cube, Q sphere, Q grid. So like, you know, I could probably come down before I had a 2D plane, and later, since I'm going to probably UV this plane and I really don't need that much subdivision, I can actually initialize this now. So let me just do this. So I'm just going to do like a 1 by 1 by 1 square and a Q grid, and that just reduced it to a plane. So now I just have to like take it and rescale it again, because it initialized it. So I'm just going to take my gizmo, turn it, shift click it, turn, make that flat, scale it, right? Maybe go through a couple of times, just make it bigger than the floor, just so I have a little bit of overlap, right? So this could be a big scene, so maybe not so big, maybe right about there or something, yeah? And later I would probably check the pivot, maybe go in and do unify, just to make sure that it's centered. Sometimes it can get off center. So I'm going to leave it that big for now. Maybe just a tad smaller. There we go. Okay. Yep, that works. Alright. So it looks simple for now, but what I'm trying to think is just do like a little bit of thinking to set up how I want to make like a grid, like a block grid. Alright. Like even if I was to make these taller buildings, which might actually kind of be a little cool. And I really have to think, in a lot of ways, I kind of thought of this process while watching some techniques by Zmodeler. He's a cool guy over at ILM, and he has a great tutorial out on Octane and Blender as well. But yeah, he's got some great stuff. If you guys ever have a chance, look him up. He's on Gumroad. Alright, so I'm going to stretch this guy a little wider, maybe a little bit more this way, take up some more space here in the corner, and at least this way we can later think of positioning and height. And a lot of these, you know, you see me kind of messing with them and they're sunken below the plane, but I would just raise them up and just have them slightly intersect, right? Maybe this guy as well. There we go. There we go. So I'll work with these guys for now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start with this big guy here. View the poly frames, and then I'm just going to go into solo and work on this guy, right? So to start with using some of the geometry, I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, Z, and that's with the Zmodeler, right? This will allow me to edit a lot of the edges, vertexes, vertex points rather, faces, and I can sort of cut the geometry up a little bit. So I'll start with hitting the space bar here over the geo, and over the edge I'm going to get some edge tools and just do like a couple of inserts and I'm going to hit X. There we go. And for this face, I'm going to use QMesh. Single poly is fine, and then I'm going to pull this in a quarter step, and I'm going to hold Alt and just click here and bring some of these in. Actually, you know what? Maybe I should bring that down because it looks like it's got too much bend. So I'll do a 10th step. It's the lowest setting. Right, so this will be part of the most forward building. Oops. Oops. Trying to grab that face there. So that'll be like our lobby or entranceway into a maybe a larger superstructure. These guys here. Bring these up. Maybe that's a cavity that we can mess with, so I'm just bringing some structures up. We'll divide this up a little bit. Go. I'll raise this. And so basically from one Q cube, I'm actually building something up. And of course, you know, with using QMesh, what I like to do is a lot of times is, you know, when I have cavities like this where it's maybe too open, I can take and just hit Alt and bring these two in and snap them together. And then maybe take these guys and push them on through, right? Go. It's kind of hard to get in here sometimes, but I'll push this guy through. You could do some more cutting here, and here, and here. I'll take these guys and cut them through. Oh, maybe I messed that up. Oh yeah, that's why. Got this guy here. Yeah, that should be cool. We can take few loops here, and I'm not doing this necessarily to hold shape, but I'm going to pull like small secondary forms out of like just some of the looped areas. So like I'm going to hold here and hold Alt and pull this up a little bit. Maybe have like a little small form or structure there. Be neat to do like a little spire from there. some spots like this. Push them in ever so slightly to create windows. That's cool. Alright, so maybe something... I'm going to set this... I'm going to go inside of this loop here. And I want to push out a little bit of geometry along this edge and then maybe skip a few loops and do the same. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do. What I want to do is actually pull these two parts out, but I want to do the whole loop. So I'm going to hit spacebar, QMesh, I think it should be Polyloop, and just pull out. Right about to there. Here, do the same thing here. There we go. Alright, let's compare it to our floor again. Floor looks like it's sitting up a little high, so I'm going to take it just so we can get it set up level to the grid. There we go. Take this guy. Actually, I'll shrink this down just a bit. There we go. There we are. That a thinner building, and with this I can also maybe put in just like something like, oops, there we go. Put in a loop here, and a loop here. I'll take this poly loop and pull it out so slightly, and then this one from the top, I think I'm going to put in some extra loops. There we go. There we go. I'll just take these faces individually and select them. Spacebar again, only on the face. I'll go single poly Q mesh. It's again the same 10th step, and just barely push it down. And I'll do my poly loop trick for this side again. See if I can. Oops. Barely pull that out. Insert an edge here. There we go. Right there. Right about here, here, here. I'll take this poly loop. Pull it out a bit. Same with. Oops. Right. Maybe I should take this. Do that. And I'll just go Polygroup Island. QMesh. There we go. Oops. That's what I wanted. then maybe also you can go along the edges, hit the space bar, and do something like a bevel. So I'm just going to do like a single row bevel, edge loop complete. Just give this a little bit of beveled shapes. You guys feel free to ask me any questions. I'll try to make sure that I can answer. Let's see if I get this right. Sorry, I'm trying to actually also... there we go. For some reason, I was trying to see everyone's chats from every place else. But yeah, if feel free to ask me any questions while I'm working. Try to keep an eye on my second screen here so I can answer back. There we go. Before you know it, you got a building, you know? So this is just like a, just sort of like a mock-up of really what I want to use. And then each individual building, what I can do is take them and sort of UV them, or either use the polygroups to UV and flatten them, and then I can do, you know, other things in Octane when I render, when it comes time to rendering, to give it a more complex look. But basically, what I'm doing is just doing a solid block out of like a small area of city, you know, and to see how it looks when I put it into an actual rendering system. So I'm just creating like some simple geo, right? So finally, what I'll be doing with this is I can save each part as an OBJ, and then I can set that up in my node structure in Octane. Just to sort of give you sort of a preview of how things look in Octane. This is kind of like, I don't even know if it would be considered a crash course, but I'll explain what I have here so that we can be all on the same page. So Octane is a GPU renderer, right? One of the cool things that I can set up in it is setting up a render target and a daylight environment. And when I say set up or click on the render target, it'll show in the viewer, you know, my connected HDRI, sort of a stage that I have set just for lighting, depending on what I'm doing. It's likely that I probably for this won't use this node, so like even if I wanted to, I could just take in, hold control and cut it off and not use it, because it wouldn't be chained with our node structure tree here. But just to sort of show you a setup, I have an HDR that's plugged into both sky color, which should give you all of the HDRI's like hinted lights, and then the actual texture showing the image, right? So this gets plugged into two spots. I have a thin lens camera set up, render target, daylight environment. Interesting thing about this is I can actually set it to like a sort of time and time zone. So, you know, I have mine set for Los Angeles by default, and then what I can do is I can change the actual daylight hours. So, you know, moving the slider, I can create like an early morning, sort of, you know, twilight hour lighting, or go all the way to the afternoon, maybe 3:30, I think, in the afternoon. There we go. So you can see sort of like an orange haze. If I was to cut out the texture, probably in the daylight sky, you can actually see kind of what time it is. And when I get to rendering something, probably depending on what time it is, the sun, the pitch of the sun will actually be visible in the render. So that's actually kind of cool. So let me just plug this back in. And this is an HDRI that I took in downtown Los Angeles myself. In fact, when I stuck my camera out of the car, these fine folks pulled up and they were like looking at what I was doing, and I was like, yeah, it's for sort of a visual effects study, and they were like, yeah, that's what we thought, blah blah blah. So pretty funny, but works like a charm for lighting some things. I've used just a few HDRIs that I took that end up being pretty okay. But let's see. So I have basically these are all of the objects in the scene. So just like this little stage ramp are just my OBJs. They get it linked into a group, and then the placement. So basically when I want to change the position of something, I mess with the placement. And then that goes into a geometry group and placement, later to a render target. So this is just like a basic default that I have saved. So every time I open Octane, I have a go start point. So what I'm going to be doing is doing a few buildings and environmental objects here in ZBrush just as a test to see how I can use very quickly Zmodeler to do like sort of a building structure or like a mega structure or something like that, and then use that simple sketch in an actual render, right, inside of Octane. So like, I always love to give you guys ZBrush knowledge, and then, you know, maybe have some fun in ZBrush, but also introduce you to a few other tools that, you know, could also work and coincide with ZBrush to have a lot of really cool fun. So I hope everybody gets something out of it. There we go. I'll lower this guy down here. Alright, so I'm going to go back to my Zmodeler brush. Edge actions, insert. Go dynamic solo just so I can see this guy, and the floor I will turn off. Select and lift these up with a Q mesh, single poly. And from this short edge here, I'm actually going to take do a quick bevel here, but I'm going to use edge loop partial, I believe. So with edge loop partial, probably I want it to terminate here and here, so I'm going to see if it that would be a difficult one. I would probably have to take the whole thing and do an edge loop complete, I think. That might be problematic. No, I'm not going to worry about that there. I'm just going to block up the rest of it. Yeah, that would be good. Okay, so let's just do this. It doesn't really matter if I can't get a bevel straight, because what I could do is just put like an edge loop here, an edge loop here, and I like to do this myself, but you can use masking on Zmodeler pieces. So I'll just draw like a light mask, including the vertices that I want to move, and while it's masked on the part that I clicked and dragged over, what I can do is I can hit Control and just click on the canvas, and it'll invert the selection. And then I can of course use the widget space or the widget world space tool, and what I'll do is it's using symmetry, so if I push it using the handler here, I can sort of space out those and get the bevel that I kind of wanted in the first place, right? So I just need it to go sort of like a stepped arch. And I'll clear the mask, keep going somewhere else. Hit Q to draw. There we go. I'll create another step in between here. I swear to God, I have had the worst problems with Wacom drivers of late. Come on, Wacom, please hear me. Fix your drivers. There we go. So these I'm going to actually take and sort of push in a little bit. And I'm only going to worry about one side for now, this facing side. But I can take this guy, and this guy. I'll take this, and this, and this guy. And come over here and take this guy. Q-mesh those guys in a little bit. And see, because it's set to a 10th step, and I haven't completed the full step, I mean, it usually snaps to the steps, which is awesome. but like I can give it sort of like a nice little featured angle. So I'll do that. I'll leave that there, and I'll have like something like that looks like a building front, right? Because then I can take this guy all the way to here. Grab these faces. Right? And with the Q mesh, again, and just bring up certain steps or levels of it. We'll do Poly Island. Let's see. Yeah. I'll just go through these and see the there we go. So at the border, so it's terminating at the border. And I just wanted to raise up one part of this. Do it again. There we go. And let's see. I'll take this, 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 and this. Lastly there, and see if I can just push in this little polygroup here, creating some windows, right? There we go. So now I think it would be cool to have something like a smaller trim detail like on these. So I can use cubes again, just so in the same way I just used like the insert primitive. It's the IMM primitives brush, and just this is like by far the most handy insert ever that will ever be, because it's just like a simple cube, and if you're doing like a lot of box modeling, you could put that bad boy anywhere and just use the Zmodeler brush to just, you know, start messing around with it, playing with shapes, developing your shapes. You know, the Q mesh can pretty much do all of the extrusion stuff for you, which is pretty awesome. So right here I'm just gonna create like a box. I'm shift clicking. As you notice, it's masked, so that's why I keep this handy and just split points. There we go. Actually, for now, just so that we're working clean, I'm going to turn some of the other stuff off except for what we need. So that's my cube, that's my building. I'll turn that off for a minute and hide it. Turn this guy off. Just make this visible, right? So now I don't need as much geometry on this cube. So what I'm going to do is with the Zmodeler brush, I'm just going to go ahead, spacebar that, and then just delete the edge and edge loop complete. So just 1, 2, 3. Take that out. So all I have now is just a single poly square that I can manipulate. And let's see if we can do something kind of cool here for the front of these. So I'll come out of that and just use the Q mesh on one single poly, this one, stretch that up. And when I do that, of course, I get a new poly group, so it's kind of convenient to mess around with. And very simplistically, I'm going to do an insert on the edge, chop that right about there, and maybe here, here. And as far as this guy goes, what I'm going to try to do is just take it now, and I'm going to duplicate it by holding Control and clicking on the directional arrow. This is along the X. Usually the red handle is on the X, so I'm going to slide it over and create a duplicate. And since some of these faces are pretty simple, I'm just going to take this guy's face in here, and I'm going to use a Q cube to just join it the other way, right? So if I just slide it out, bam, if you saw it snap, then now you know, if I look at it in dynamic solo, this is actually one complete piece now, all welded together. You know, if you use dynamic smoothing or something, you can look at it. So it's actually welded. And then I'm going to take, put another insert edge loop here. And maybe do one exactly the other side. I wouldn't worry if these are uneven. Like if this object is centered and probably unified, if you wanted to, you know, make sure that both sides were equal, of course you can use the mirror and weld on a lot of parts like this. So keep that in mind. Greetings from Peru. Cheers. Greetings from Los Angeles. Hola, ¿qué pasó? ¿Cómo estamos? Get this guy. There we go. Let me see if I can do this. If I have that guy, I suppose I could maybe try to bevel this and see if it works. Kind of. The term loop is used because it's an actual edge that goes around something, creating a loop. There's a start and finish point, which usually begins at the same origin around the object. I suppose that's why they call it an edge loop, right? I had to create something of a frame here. Give me the edge, please. There we go. So I'll insert an edge here. If you ever have this problem like I was just having now, where you accidentally click on a face, so when working with the Zmodeler tool, I'm just using the insert edge loop tool, right, which happens along the edge mode of things, right? So with edge, I get this menu for edge actions. With face, I get this menu for face actions. Anything having to do with editing a poly, like a face normal poly. And of course, you have your vertex points, which are actually here in the corners. So the points of each piece of the geometry, and it has a totally different menu, right? Like, you know, you might have a split or something like that, where you're splitting a corner, or moving a corner, or deleting a vertex or something like that. Because I don't want to misclick into certain areas while I'm inserting edge loops, of course you can always come into a menu and say do nothing. And I'll do here at the corner, do nothing. And so the only mode that would be affected would be me using the edge actions. So I'm just going to go around and insert a bit. And crazy enough, this is maybe like a habit of mine, but a lot of times when I use the Zmodeler tool, half of my time is using it actually just with a mouse, like you know, full-on box model mode, like I was working in Maya or something. But yeah, you can do that. So I'm just gonna slide these over. So now it's a little bit more equal than like on the other side. So I'm just gonna go ahead and insert a few more. Go. Yeah, it looks a bit it looks hella basic, right? Like you know, nice rectangles, one might say, but like these rectangles usually become much more complex things. In fact, I should probably show something of how this kind of work comes out. In fact, this is a great one. So I'll show you guys this. This includes part of a model that I actually paid to use. There's one object that you guys will probably recognize in it, which is a lot of fun. So, 1 second. So while that's loading, I'll come back to ZBrush and keep working, and then I'll show you what's up. initialize this one as a Q cylinder. There we go. This Q cylinder here. To make a really tiny cylinder piece to use as a sort of like a scaffolding beam, and so I'm going to turn this way at 45 and stretch it out a bit, and then I can hold Alt and move the gizmo to reset it to the angle that I want. Move it, and actually I'm going to take hold Control, duplicate this one again so I can use it, and actually turn it the other way. Right, so take this guy, size it a little bit lower. Alright, so I'm sure it's loaded by now. So this is what a typical scene that I've been working on and experimenting with in Octane looks like. It's pretty big, has a lot of nodes, a lot of geometry placed, a lot of placement groups, a lot of smaller little bits. But I'll try to explain kind of what the angle is here. I'm going to go ahead and click on the render target, so it's got to compile the scene for a minute. Yes, or actually the backdrop being the piece, but usually when I have to concept something like an environment, like I would try to build, simple geometry, and then take that simple geometry and start cutting it up into little tiny bits until it gets way refined into like tertiary detail. And so in that, what I figured is one could use ZBrush and use the Zmodeler tool to take just like a simple Q-cube and build it up as a building, right? And so you start by using an initial block out, so it's just like simple forms, and that's why it looks so simple now. But when you get to it, you can have something like this. So if you see my screen here, this is a scene that I'm composing in Octane. I modeled just a simple 2D plane, some other structures off to the side using the method like I did on the taller building in our ZBrush file, just using Zmodeler. And then I UV mapped it and took only one part of it and put some displacements in it. And then I kit bashed the side of it to actually have like some actual geometry nested into there. So what you're looking at is like an illusion between scaled buildings, the flying spinner craft in air, and then of course you have your two small towers over here, partially which are displacement, geo. I think this is actually geometry. But everything is UV mapped, so when I start messing with the textures, I can actually put in what is called like black bodies, which are like emissive materials with masks, and those can become the the smaller lights, which I have yet to distribute on the lower part of the plane. And what I was mentioning with something like the small app that I presented to you just a few moments ago, Displacement, I've actually randomized a displacement map to act as sort of like a cityscape along the plane. So if I move this around, it's pretty heavy. It actually takes up both. I'm streaming at the same time as rendering, but all of this takes a few seconds. And if I let it sit for just a moment, probably like 5 minutes, and come back, the render will be a little bit more refined. This one actually takes about probably a good solid 30 minutes to really get going on its render. But I have lights and also VDB objects in this, which has to do with a lot of the volumetric smoke that you see in the background. Actually, let me see if I can turn it off really quick so you can see this a little bit more clearly. There we are. So with this, you know, there are some areas that I started with in ZBrush and some elements that I use ZBrush to create, especially with these buildings. And then once placed, I just have a displacement map for the actual cityscape floor. And then these were built in Zmodeler and also using Blender with Box Cutter, which is a nice tool. Does some really complex Boolean systems kind of operations to it, modifiers. And then I just saved the OBJ and plopped it in. So you're looking at real geometry here, faked geometry using 2 or 3 displacement maps here to push the geo out and make it look complex. So this would be our visual noise, I guess you could say. And then we have a couple of other structures off to the side which utilize both geometry and, like this one here, it is completely like it's geometry, but the center point of it is all displacement map here. In fact, let me see if I can zoom in because this one's kind of neat. There we are. Here we are. So with this city, like all of the smaller tiers here would be one single displacement. I think it's like I just UV'd out like this square here, and then I put 2 pieces of I believe these are Vitaly Bulgarov's mega kit structure, or mega structure kit. I just took a piece of panel and stuck it to the side of the buildings and then displaced the center and quickly got an asset that I can control, right? So that's kind of like the totally Tyrell core, sort of like a Tyrell-esque pyramid in the background, just playing kind of I've been really experimenting with setting up sort of like cinematic like type of shots or mood environment pieces, and I haven't shared a lot of this stuff, but this is kind of stuff that I'm working up to have an interesting go, and then I would take it and render it, and then from the render I would compile it. So basically what I get is an output of all of the different map passes for this, and then in Photoshop put it together and then maybe do a little bit of paint overs. So that gets to be where I take like high-res backdrops like clouds or city scapes that I want to put in the far plane and match them to the horizon, so that the scene becomes a lot more immersive. Maybe smaller elements I'll put, like as far as like holographs or smaller buildings I'll build and just set in so that it populates the scene a little bit better. But basically this is sort of the groundwork for that. And usually where it starts is one of the easiest ways that I can model some of these assets is to just either, if I'm not using a Blender, I probably would start by blocking these out, because it's really easy to block out inside of ZBrush. So I'll block them out in ZBrush, and so I get these sort of proxy meshes like this. They don't look like much, but once done, in fact, I think I have to pause this because it's gonna drain some resources. There we go. But yeah, the more you let this sit, the more a lot of the light and shadows start to catch a whole lot more. I have this set to some pretty high settings for this render, so it takes a minute to actually render out a nice clean image, especially with the fog turned on. So going back here, I'm just gonna keep chugging away at this and see what we get at the end. Oh, Dark and Grim, you're welcome. Cheers. Yeah, basically I'm using it as a backdrop, right? Thanks, Baxter. Appreciate it. So, alright, so let's keep going with it. So I'll take this guy and actually do the same control, duplicate. And I'm just going to nest it inside of the geometry like so, because I'm going to have a beam come across the side here. So what I'll do is I'll just do BZ. And do an insert there. That's not going to connect well. I think there's a extra loop that doesn't need to be there. Delete that. Hey. There we go. That should. Leon. Oh snap. I think I changed something and I didn't even notice it. So let's see if we can fix that really quick. There we are. This guy, yeah. Looks about right. There we go. That is a little uneven, but we can fix that. So that is the X, okay. And actually, I'm just going to take this guy. Unify it so it's in the center, and then I'll come over to geometry, modify topology, I'll mirror weld along the X, and if I do that it should give me equal sides on both sides. And then I'll just need to put it back in place and resize it. Just a quiet night, huh? I hear that. There we go. Nest this in a little bit more, take this one, pull it in a little bit more, and I think to get what I wanted out of this, I might have to mask here and just take the other one and push it up a little bit. Maybe bring this down. There we go. I don't know, 3 seems to be too much. Maybe we take one on one side and then we put something in the middle there. There we go. And then I'll split mask points. And so all I would have to do really if I wanted to reuse these is duplicate the shapes, or maybe temporarily. They have different polygroups, of course, so they can be broken apart later. So if I take this one and I'm just going to go ahead and merge these 3 shapes together. So I'll just, under the merge, I'll merge down again. And now that we have that, I'll use the world space gizmo and we'll just control click it over to the other side and sort of start to distribute them around, changing their shape a little bit. Right. There we go. Right. Oh, that's weird. There we go. All right. Let's see here. You know what? Let's mix it up and make it interesting. You know what? Actually, let's just do this. I'm going to use a little tool of mine here that I like to use in Blender really quick, and then just bring a piece over if I can. So I've been using this a lot, you know, for exactly this sort of thing, and also a lot of other hard surface tools. But I'm using a free 3D package Blender. If you're not familiar, I'm sure you can find it, you know, with a nice search. But as far as like doing like any type of poly editing or anything like that, rather than using Maya or Max and a lot of other ways, I'm using Blender in conjunction with a buddy of mine's tools, HardOps, which has a box cutter included inside of it. Basically what it is it's a Boolean tool for concept modeling, but it's also a lot of other tools for hard surface modeling and design. So I'm just gonna kind of come in and do some cuts if I can here. I'll look at it from above and actually switch Shift D. No. Where is there we go. Well, you know what? Hold on a second. Sorry about this. I guess I'll set F#. And, that's what I wanted. Okay. Just going with box. I'm going to go along grid view from the top. I'm just going to like take and make some cuts here. I think it made the cut, but can't be sure. I wonder if I undid. I guess I undid it. Holy heck. I work actually as a freelance concept designer, so right now I'm working on some stuff that I've signed an NDA on, and I really can't discuss, but it is a film project, and I'm doing some world building on that project. I actually forgot how to do something. Oh dear. That's not the one. Sorry about that. Having some trouble selecting something. I'm just gonna go ahead and not waste time, since we only have a limited amount of time left. Come back and do it here. Sorry about that. I was going to show you guys some really neat stuff, but for some reason it escapes me. It's some stuff that I'm still learning myself. I couldn't remember the hotkeys. My bad. So, okay. I'm going to come back here. Yeah, Blender's really cool, but I have to, it's a whole different mindset, man. I have to switch gears and kind of rethink how I would normally do something, because there's a lot of different not so used to hotkeys involved. So go along here. There's some cool stuff that I've done, especially with the the pyramid that you just saw. I used almost entirely just like the basic pyramid was built inside of ZBrush, but other than that it was all Blender. And so there was some cool stuff to do there. But I just totally forgot how to quickly jump in and do a few things I need to brush out. Like if I don't use it for a couple of weeks, I totally will forget it. So I'm afraid that's what happened. I don't want to take up too much time to mess with it, so we'll go back to the basics. There. And I think move the silver just a tad. And here, let's put like another cube. I'm going to change it up a bit. You could use Max or Maya. Yeah, I probably could. You know, in fact, I don't know. The Zmodeler tool is really, really simplistic. So, like, you know, when I'm short on time and I just need to come in here and, like, build some general shapes that I'll later try to refine, you know, it's an excellent, like, tangible tool for that, you know? That way I don't have to load up Maya or Max, which are a little bit heavy on top of already having ZBrush open. So, you know, without leaving ZBrush, I'll just use this, you know what I mean? Right, exactly. It's got a lot of other tools that I can use almost in a similar fashion, and so yeah, I really don't need to exit it just to do a lot of other stuff. But when I do, I try to mix it in with workflows from a lot of other stuff that, you know, is handy. I think this geo is a little slightly off. One sec. When I drew it out, somehow it's just off slightly by a degree. So I'm going to unify. Oops, actually, you know what? Let's split that, then unify it. There we go. For some reason, it's still just like a hair off. Rotate this guy. It's like off by just like a tick. There we go. And I tried to use the unify, but for some reason it still didn't straighten it out. It just brought it to the center. So I just need like a platform that I'm going to put at the top of this building. But there's a couple of different ways to use like hard surface geometry that has a lot of complexity. I mean, one is, yes, you could block it out here, but a lot of these block-ups I can take in other places. Like if you're going to take it into Fusion and edit it there, you could do that. If you're going to take it into another 3D package like Maya, Max, yes, you can do that. Blender, yes, you can do that. When I'm using HardUp's box cutter, basically what I was trying to do is just take a simple box and start cutting away in it, but for some reason I like kind of forgot something. was going to show you kind of how this works. My Blender's being weird. Yes. So I'm going to restart it for a second. What? You can't use Zmodeler? I mean, it's really easy to use it if you guys have never used it. Basically what I'm doing is I'm using one specific insert tool, right? So with this box, when I put it in, all you're doing is hitting on the keyboard B, I, and getting the insert primitives out, right? And once you select those, you hit M on the keyboard, and in there, there's an insert cube and there's Q cube, and I'm using the Q cube. So I'm going to select it, and then I'll look at my perspective, pick a point, and just click and drag holding shift, right? And when you do that, it'll apply at size, and then usually it'll put a mask on the object that you're drawing it on, or the surface you're drawing it on, the subtool that you're drawing it on. And with that, I've customized my UI, just a few buttons, but I put split mask points up here, and so when I draw it on, I can just split it and quickly jump in and work on just this object alone, right? So if you had any questions about, you know, why am I drawing cubes, or, you know, I'm just doing like a sort of boxed block out, because what I want to do is take one building or one element and save it and then use it somewhere else, right? So I'm gonna actually maybe carry this into next stream when I stream next time, because I think we have about 30 minutes left to work on this. But consider this like basically a sketch, right? And when I turn on some of the other buildings or other parts, here, I'll turn those back on. This guy, and this guy, and the plane. I'll actually rename this one ground plane. Right? Turn off the poly frames. And so basically this would be my view. And I'm trying to imagine pulling in here. Maybe I'll turn dynamic perspective on. And so this would be the area, or a camera shot area, and I can arrange the camera wherever I want. I can put objects along the ground to sort of populate the scene. But basically I kind of want to do like some composing to kind of figure out what angle that I want to shoot from. Do I want an aerial shot, you know, looking down on a street? Those are the things that I kind of consider before I jump wide into a shot like this. You know, like even this at this level, what I'm doing is exactly the same thing, except I've already built in some complexity to the objects that I've made. Like literally everything that you see here, like even the displacements, I might move the displacement map to, you know, in its transform to move some of the position of the buildings around that are actually displacement mapped, and then I can actually grab physical geometry and move it into position where I want. But gotta have the ingredients. So when I go over to ZBrush, basically this is just like almost sketch level block out, right? It's not anything pretty to look at. I mean, design wise it might carry a few interesting shapes, but later I guess in my own objectivity, I want to be able to take this and use this as a base. Maybe I might copy some of these buildings and populate the area, and then the rest I might do like a cityscape displacement, just so I don't have to model so many assets and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I'm after and what I'm experimenting with these days, and I'm trying to integrate ZBrush, Octane, Blender to do all of those things, just to build a quick cityscape scene or an asset scene. And then of course, you know, you can use these in other places, like if you're going to take it and put it into an actual live shots, you know, and add effects in Cinema 4D, or, you know, you can place them probably in After Effects. So if you're doing any type of visual effects, it's a quick way to kind of generate and populate a scene with some assets that you can create. So that's sort of the end game for for building some of these. So these are sort of like the initial steps. I've done some other experiments with geometry before. In fact, see if I have anything that I could show you guys in exactly the same vein. Let's see. Actually, they're probably about the same speed. Blender might be actually a little bit faster, just because it's purely set as a 3D package that is a poly editor, right? ZBrush is mostly a sculpting application, but I'm also using components within it, you know, like the Zmodeler, to do some poly editing. So I'm sure probably if you're just using a package that is a poly editing package, or whatever you're comfortable with, you can literally probably do the same thing. So I mean, it's nothing exclusive. It's just I thought that it would be handy to take the Zmodeler tool for those that are curious about using the Zmodeler and doing something that in the end result can be pretty extraordinary and pretty quick. So if you've ever, like, you know, wanted to use Zmodeler, I would say don't be afraid of it, because it is there. It's a tool to use, and it works with primitives, and you can actually build, you know, some really crazy complex things with it. I guess if I had a message for that. Do you use project primitive at all in this kind of concepting? Seems like that could work well. Well, yes. Some of the primitives that you start with from the opening state of ZBrush, like these here, any of these Q cubes or Q cubes with bevels, I like them, but I just don't like them absolutely because they have a really smooth edge. I like the hard edge and start from there and then smooth later. Because if you wanted to smooth it, if you place what are called support loops, like say for example if I take this, right, and I actually smooth it, it's going to be really, really soft depending on the subdivision that I choose, right? But some areas I might want to remain rounded, and some I want probably to stay absolutely hard, and I can either use creasing or support loops to keep those edges, right? So I mean, this is kind of like topology 101 kind of stuff, but if I was to look at this, the closer, let's say I put an inserted edge very close to this edge, right? And we want to maintain this because we want it to be hard, right? Like hard in shape. So I'm actually gonna draw one across very close to the top edge and one across to the vertical edge, and if I smooth this, you'll see that this edge maintained where the others did not, right? That is because this is an actual support edge along the corner, right? It's going to hold the shapes, and the closer it is, the tighter the edge is going to be. Although I wouldn't put it at the absolute edge. Otherwise, if you did that, you might as well use creasing. You know what I mean? So, with that sort of in mind, that's how I'm just blocking out in simple shapes. I'm not intending to yet subdivide, just because I want to keep that blockiness and be able to refine later on, right? When I do that, that's how I get a lot of these shapes here, right? Or here. So I just did like a simple block out of the building in sort of tiers, and all of the smaller, in fact, gotta play this back so I can actually move it around. I'll zoom in here and look at this building a little bit. So this is a bit of an illusion, right? Because I have the spinner here, which is way larger in scale than it should be if it was relative to these buildings. But I have it that way so that we can view detail, and we could use forced perspective to actually make it or assume that these buildings are larger, right? So when you look at it when it's lined up, maybe somewhere around here, it actually makes it look like, you know, these buildings are massive, and the car is in our, you know, very front for sight area of line of sight, right? And by the way, I should make a special note that this spinner is one that I have borrowed and for this render, just to test around and play around with. But it was originally created by a gentleman by the name of Pete Norris, out of Great Britain, and he's a great modeler. I would take a look at some of his work. He's got some great works. Yep. So that's kind of how things are done. Like, yeah, these buildings were all, you know, Z modeled, and then they were taken into Blender, and I used box cutter to basically chop up a lot of cut lines. And so, like, some of the times what I can do is I can use the booleans to create extra geometry by just cutting them out of the face. And so that's kind of how I set it up, right? And when you drop it in the middle of displacement maps along the grid plane, it really, you know, they sort of become seamless. It looks populated. It looks like the structure was built around a bunch of other structures, or vice versa. And sort of, you get sort of like a natural harmony between, you know, what it really isn't geometry and what is actual physical geometry, right? So I'm gonna pause this one for a second because of resources. So, but at least with Blender, I'll show you guys kind of if I can get this going right. I just have like a box. Hit Alt W and open T to open the T panel. I believe it's 1, 5 to get the numpad numbers for the views. 5 being the grid view, 1 and 3 being side and front, 7 being up. And then what I'll do is I'll just center this, see if I can mess with it for a second, have a better go. I think my machine was choking out earlier. Q usually gives you the hard ups menu, and I'm just gonna hit tab, which will give you the edit menu. And so, you know, with this you can actually select faces and pull them out. If I can in some way open a R8 file inside of ZB. That would be difficult. I would say if you're going to open anything from ZBrush R8, I would open it up and then save it as something that can be ported over, like an OBJ file. If you have polygroups on that OBJ file, yeah, it should port right over, and you can just use a piece of geometry and import it right over. But usually the file types are not backwards compatible, if I'm pretty certain. But you have layers. Well, that might be a little bit difficult. With layers, I would bake those in, and then try to save it as OBJ and then send it to somebody. But sending it with layers intact from one file type that's newer back to an older ZBrush user, I'm not sure it's going to necessarily work. I think they would have to update. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Alright. And, up there. And I'll push the face in. I can use that later. So the Q mesh with the poly loop. Top and the roof, and I want to do something with cool on the corners here, but I'm not sure exactly what I want to do. Actually, you know what, that might be a good idea if I come over here and I do an inset. There, and then I can Q-mesh this here at the top. So let's do one here. Oops. Just a single poly. Something of a spire, and I can duplicate that over if I like that spire for the all sides pretty easily, but something like that would be what I would want to do. But you get a sense of how I'm just pushing and pulling geometry around, right? So I mean, you repeat the steps of this and you build up your complexity. So that's what I'm trying to attempt here. You know what? I like that, so I'm going to actually mirror it over. So let's see here. There's the Z forward for this object, I suppose. And go modify topology and mirror and weld along the Z forward. Or actually, other way. Deformation mirror Z forward. There we go. Now, of course, I would have to move that back into place, but then I could mirror it. And weld Z forward. There we go. Alright, so let's try something simple with this. I've got 2 or 3 buildings that I think I can use in a scene, and I may not use the same layout, but I'll actually show you kind of what it looks like and what we can do. So I'm going to set this up where I have like a piece of geometry like this, which represents a building, and then if I wanted to, I could use the same Q mesh to do a couple of other things. One is, a lot of times I like to use geo as actual like emissive lights, so I'll just tuck a little piece of geometry back in here to kind of show you how something could look if it was backlit. So I'm going to click here, and then what I'll do is I'll just do another insert here. I'll just make it really small, and I'll position it. There we go. I need to split it. Mash it down a little bit. This way. Octane Vr, and actually I should explain, it's a rendering application, a renderer to be more specific, and it uses GPU only. It's a GPU renderer, much in the same, I'm sure, as BPR, but maybe a little bit more finite. It has some other powerful tools for controlling your environmental lighting, not just like HDRI or anything, but you can place HDRIs. You can use actual sunlight direction and time, and also like global position. So like this is something I can do. I can actually set this, you know, like for a completely different time zone, you know, and then it would flip wherever my sky position is, right? So kind of the difference between this low sun that I have here and then on the other side, if I changed it to another global position, you can see that light starts to come from a different position, right? Based off of the global position. Right? So like New York, the sky is going to be different, maybe different time zones, especially if I change it around the globe a little bit, it'll definitely change its position. Maybe something like that. You know, light up sort of like the center of the buildings, have some nice fall off of shadows and stuff like that. So I mean, it's really cool, and I can also add materials. It has a live database of materials that a community actually supports. People make their own materials inside of here. You can use Substance or Quixel with this, and you know, anything that you bake maps out of. Even ZBrush with poly painting information and, you know, normal map information. You can put it into this, plug it into a material, and connect it to your model. And it's just really sharp. It's probably on the same par as like V-Ray or Redshift. right? If you're savvy to know any of those. But it has a standalone, but it also uses a plugin. So like if you're using Maya as a package, you can get the standalone plus the plugin for whatever package that you're using. Cinema 4D, Maya, I believe Houdini, a couple of other applications. But for this, I'm just using the standalone because it's a lot like Keyshot in a way. Its simplicity, and it has a node structure, which is pretty easy to understand, but it can also be collected into a lot of complex lighting. And I'm using also things like Displacement. It's a small app to generate displacement maps, and I'm just modeling like props, like building props, and nesting in those with displacements. So that's exactly why I use this. And I can also do a lot of other post effects. I can put a post effect node in here, camera imager and whatnot, and change a lot of the exposure, highlights, post effects that'll make this look really cool in the end. And I can enable a lot of different finite passes, lighting passes, diffuse and direct, reflection and direct, Z-depth pass, AO. All of these are turned on and would be included into the render when I do a batch export of everything. And basically, I would compose those into one solid image and have like a layout, right, that I can then put into Photoshop and then do some overpainting, and I would have a solid environment finished. There's a few of these that I have that I'm working on. I won't necessarily show them now in stream, but screenshots aside, I think actually, hold on a second. I'm gonna have to pause this. When it starts to use the GPU, it really shoots up some of the use on both cards. My machine now is equipped with a GTX 1080 Ti, working alongside in the same box a 1070 Ti, and I'm using both to do a lot of GPU rendering these days. So let's see if I can show you some that are experiments of mine. Sorry, this might take just a second, but just looking around for some of them. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm like actually looking around for them, but I don't want to take up too much time. Next time around, I'll pull out some of these because I'm going to probably finish this here in the next couple of weeks. But next stream in, I think I'll probably have a lot more show on those. But yeah, I do renders of these and then I paint over them in Photoshop a lot. There's some other stuff that I have, but it's work stuff that I can't show, unfortunately. Let's see. Where did I put it? Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Yeah, they always seem so complicated. Like this is a earlier view. Actually, I took the same pyramid into Keyshot and tried to do a treatment and see what it looked like with just like a simple material and like a sort of some metallic, grunge mapped onto it. It's just wrapping around, but this is what the object literally looks like as geometry outside of the scene, But all of these cuts and forms were all done inside of Blender and HardOps / box cutter, and I would just simply keep cutting shapes out until I built up sort of an ornate design. Here you'll see where like I did a cutout of a shape, and then I actually took the geometry and shifted it in and used it to the advantage. And these little focal areas become really nice, you know, when you get in there and you put some like emissive lights on it, and then you do a little painting over. Maybe every once in a while like a little photo bashing and sampling just for the nooks and crannies or insets of geometry. But there's a lot you can do with it just as a static image. Trying to show that I had some other images of these. Yeah, it looks totally different when you put it into a scene and get it going. But I think there's one of Gemma's, Gemma Jubarev, his maps in here that I set low just to have a few structures straddling the larger ones. But all of this smaller one was a map that I kicked out of Displacement, which is really cool. It sort of randomizes a lot of different patterns. It gives it sort of like a natural look. And so what you're looking at is, let's see if I can explain this right. So here's your 2D plane, right? And then here's another 2D plane. This one has one displacement on it. This one has a different displacement on it. And then I just intersect them, and when I intersect them I get a new different pattern blend it into both. And so that's why, you know, if I was to unpause this and look at it here and I turn it, that's why the plane, the horizon plane, looks super thick, right? So all these little building like structures are actually being fused in with a totally different 2D plane for the horizon, and then, you know, as they intersect they become like sort of a new iteration in the design, right? So that's kind of how it works. That's why when you look at the node structure it gets kind of crazy, but you just have to try to keep track of it. If you ever lose track of your node structure, you can always reset it and center it. So just centering all of the nodes in the graph settings here in the node graph editor. Alright, so I just use the node graph editor along with you know, all of the other tools. Like these are mostly, you know, your transform tools or object tools, layer tools, I believe, and layer passes. You can select by camera, you can select by mesh, you can select by material. This is the autofocus picker, white balance picker, and so a lot of these tools I'll just cycle through and just like kind of move things around and see like what kind of shot I'm getting. You know, turn it on, you know, absolutely turn it. And then I think the part that I turned off earlier that you guys probably haven't seen here in a second is I have actual cloud or volume fog setups that I can plug in here. And so basically there's just like a volumetric fog at the horizon line and then one above it on the sky. So everything else is like kind of sandwiched in, right? So that way I can get that sort of choked environment, you know, dirty, grungy, lost your ecology 20 years ago, global warming kind of look. Awesome. Cool. Alright, so that's kind of how I do these. Alright guys, so I think I probably won't be in till next month, mid-month sometime, but until then, stay tuned. If you have any questions, I guess you could probably shoot me at either the event or artist page for ZBrushLIVE. I'm also on ArtStation as Tony Leonard, and you can find me the same, I think, under Gumroad and on Facebook. Either way, have yourself a great weekend. I think I'm going to stop and pause here, and I will work some of this up in the meantime and show you guys sort of an example of setting up things on this side after I do the work in ZBrush. Cheers. Alrighty, have a good weekend. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time, and have a wonderful weekend. Awesome. Bye guys. Take care.